If you're planning to do the IELTS test, it's essential that you work on your vocabulary every single day. Every single word that you learn will increase your chances of getting a high score, not just in writing, but in every part of the IELTS test. Now, you should know that to get a high score in IELTS doesn't require a good level of vocabulary. It requires an excellent level of vocabulary. Most students of English will never reach the level required for a Band 7 in Lexical Resource, and the number of students who reach a Band 8 are few and far between. Most teachers will tell you that it's easy because they know that that's what you want to hear. However, I'm going to be honest with you. It's not easy at all. Now, I'm not saying this to scare you. The purpose of this lesson is to help you get your IELTS score. However, it's important that you understand what's ahead of you. If you understand how important it is to study vocabulary every single day, a high lexical resource score is a very realistic outcome for you. In this lesson, you will learn my strategy, which shows you step by step what you need to do to improve your lexical resource band score. My name is Lara Ryan. I've been an IELTS examiner. I've been an IELTS teacher at the British Council. I have over a decade of experience with the IELTS test, and I am the founder of Complete Test Success. To improve your vocabulary, step number 1 is to choose appropriate texts. You're not going to use word lists because word lists are really only useful to help you understand words when you hear them or understand words when you read them. However, if you need to use these words in speaking and writing and you want to use them accurately, word lists will not give you enough information to do this. Instead, we're just going to read texts, and when we find a new word, we're going to add it to our vocabulary notebooks. Because you need to write a formal essay for Task 2, we're going to read formal texts so that you're getting the vocabulary that you need for the IELTS test. Newspapers are the most obvious resource for this. Now, depending on your level, it's very likely that newspapers written for native English speakers are above your level right now. You don't want to read a text that is above your level because there will be too many words you don't understand and you'll get confused. This will actually slow down your progress. On the other hand, you don't want to read texts that are too easy because you won't find any new vocabulary. What you need is a text that's a little bit challenging for you, but not impossible to understand. I have some recommendations that I'm going to show you right now, and you will be able to find links for all of these in the video description below. So we have 3 websites here: News in Levels, Breaking News English, and dreamreader.net. Now, I recommend these 3 because these 3 websites have texts which are quite short, so they're very manageable. And let's just select an article here. You'll see that there is level 4, 5, and 6 for this article. There are levels 0, 1, 2, and 3 for this article. So just start with one of the low levels, and if it's too easy for you, you can move up to the next level. Eventually, in these 3 websites, even the most difficult levels will become too easy for you. And that means that you're ready to stop using these websites and move on to e-news. This one is a bit more challenging because the articles are longer and the vocabulary used is more complex. This website also has the option of choosing different language levels, so like before, you'll work your way up through these over time. Once this one becomes too easy, you're ready to move on to standard newspapers which were written for native English speakers. Now, just so you're aware, this isn't going to be a quick process. I'm telling you this because if you think you're going to go from level to level to level, from newspaper to newspaper very quickly, you'll get demotivated and you'll quit. It won't all happen in a matter of weeks. This will take time, and if you understand that, your chances of success are much higher. Step 2 is to focus on the right topics. When you're reading newspapers, you don't want to just read the front page every single time. You need to actively look for common IELTS topics that you're not already familiar with. I already went through these in part 1 of this lesson, so if you haven't already seen this, you'll find a link in the description below. Step 3 is to only select useful words and phrases. Now, what does useful mean? Useful words and phrases are ones that you will likely see again. This also means that you'll very likely have an opportunity to use them in your own speaking and writing at some point in the future. So, as you're reading texts, you're not going to select every single new word or phrase that you find to put into your vocabulary notebook. If you do, you'll have far too much new vocabulary, and also you'll end up wasting a lot of time studying vocabulary that you will never see or hear or use ever again. So how do you know which words you should learn? You want to find words that are already familiar to you, but you don't completely understand their meaning. If you're reading a text and you think to yourself, "Oh, I've seen this word before," that's a good indication that it's a word you should learn. This is because if you recognize it from before, that very likely means that you'll see it again. Before you start to actually research the meaning of the word, there's one very important skill that you can practice for your IELTS reading test at this particular time. That skill is to guess the meaning of a word from the context. In the IELTS reading test, you will definitely find vocabulary that you have never seen before. That's completely normal. But that is why the skill of guessing the meaning from context is so important. Here's an extract from the Guardian newspaper to help us understand how we would do this. The revelation of how much money Microsoft has saved by routing via Ireland comes as world leaders hammer out an agreement to tackle multinational tax avoidance before the G7 meeting in Cornwall this month. Now, the phrase that I've seen a few times before but don't understand is hammer out. Now, I want to guess the meaning from context first. Because of its position in the sentence, I know that it's acting as a verb, so this is definitely a phrasal verb. It's obviously connected to agreeing or disagreeing, so I'm going to guess that it either means to make or to fail to make an agreement. Now, I'm going to look at other parts of the text to give me some more clues. The word as indicates that it's something that's ongoing, and it's incredibly unlikely that it means fail to make an agreement if they're still in the process. Because of that, I'm going to settle on my guess being hammer out an agreement, meaning make an agreement. Now, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, and it really doesn't matter if I'm wrong. What's important is that I've thought about this and used all the information available to me to make the best possible guess. The more you practice this skill, the better you will get at it. Now that I've found a word I want to learn, we move on to step 4, which is adding it to our notebooks. Because our intention is to use this piece of vocabulary in writing and in speaking in the future, it's incredibly important that we are careful with this step. The more research we do now and the more information we add to our vocabulary notebooks means we're far more likely to use it accurately in the future. So the first thing I want to do is include a group of words, not just the new phrase that I'm learning. So in this sentence, I'm not going to just write down hammer out. I'm going to give myself more context so that I can learn it accurately. So I will include they hammered out an agreement. Now, in our vocabulary notebooks, we are not going to translate that phrase into our own language. When you first start studying English, it was okay to translate words into your own language because you had no other options. At your current level, however, this is no longer suitable. The first reason is because you will encounter more and more words that don't have a direct translation into your language. Another reason you shouldn't translate that phrase into your own language is because in your mind, you want to eventually separate English from your own language. If you're in the IELTS test and you have to think in your own language and then translate that into English and then write down what you want to say, you're far more likely to make mistakes and it's going to take you way longer. Eventually, the goal is for you to be able to think in English. This is obviously better for your writing, but just imagine how much better your fluency will be when you're able to think in English. So now we're going to look at what you actually do include in your vocabulary notebook. We basically want to include anything that will help us to understand it properly and remember it easily. Examples of what you can include are the meaning, the word class, collocations, diagrams, drawings, different colour writing, pronunciation, examples, and anything else that you think is relevant. The most obvious place to look first is a dictionary. So I've just looked up hammer out in the Cambridge Dictionary, and straight away there's something that concerns me. In the sentence where I found this phrase, it said hammer out an agreement. So that's hammer out something, but the dictionary here says hammer something out. So I'm not clear as to whether this is definitely the same phrase or where am I supposed to include an agreement when I'm using this phrase. So I'm just going to scroll down through this. I can see it's a phrasal verb as I had already guessed. I have my pronunciation here. Cambridge Dictionary includes the audio pronunciation. Here's my definition. To reach an agreement or solution after a lot of argument or discussion. Okay, so earlier on I guessed that it meant make an agreement. So I was partly right, but there is this extra meaning after a lot of argument or discussion. I definitely need to note that down. Here I have an example sentence. 3 years after the accident, the lawyers finally managed to hammer out a settlement with the insurance company. And as I scroll down, I just see some similar phrases, but it's very important to scroll down in dictionaries because there will be other meanings or other uses of the item. This time it's quite similar, but the meaning is a little bit different. It says to discuss something in detail in order to come to an agreement. And this time my example sentence includes some extra possible meanings or extra possible uses to hammer out an agreement or a deal or a solution. So now I have more options that I can use to hammer out with. Also, I can see that the phrase is being used with hammer out something, not hammer something out. So I'm more confident that I have the right phrase now. So I'll just continue to scroll down to make sure I haven't missed anything. And I have another phrase here, hammer out something. So let's take a quick look at that. And this is essentially the same thing again. So we have hammer out something to arrive at an agreement or solution after a lot of argument or discussion. So that brings me back to my vocabulary notebook, and I'm just going to include the extra bits and pieces that I gathered from looking through the dictionary. So as well as using it with an agreement, I can use it with a solution or a deal. So that's obviously very useful for me. I have the meaning, which is discuss or argue a lot before making an agreement, a solution or a deal. I also want to include that it's a phrasal verb, and I'm going to include the pronunciation so that I can learn that as well at the same time. Next, I'm going to do some further research online. Okay, I've just done a Google search for the phrase hammer out. So the first few pages will just be other dictionaries. It's okay to have a look at these. We can look at other descriptions, other definitions, other examples. That's completely fine. But at the moment, I'm more interested in seeing this phrase being used in the real world. So I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom and I'm going to click on like page 5 or 6 just to get past all the dictionary definitions. So here I have EU leaders hammer out landmark climate deal. Okay, so again, it's a deal. We already had that meaning. Here in this next one, we have it used, hammer out an upgrade of ties. Now, I'm not really sure what ties means, so I'm not going to look into that one too much more. I'm more interested on understanding hammer out in more detail. So I'm just going to continue scrolling down until I see something that seems relevant. Now, here we have 3 clever ways to hammer out your car's dent. Okay, so this is obviously relating to using an actual hammer to fix a car. So this is not what I'm looking for. Okay, so here's a new one. It's hammer out cancer. Now I'm definitely interested in looking at this because this is a new usage. Okay, so looking at this site, it's for video games, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong, but it wouldn't be as trustworthy as a reputable website, written by a university or by a newspaper. So I'm actually just going to disregard this. Okay, and here's another interesting one, to hammer out a compromise. So this is information that is new to me. Hammer out a settlement, hammer out a deal, hammer out a consensus, hammer out a compromise. Now, I'm not just going to take this for granted. I want to copy this. I'm going to paste this into Google and search it just to make sure that this is common usage. I don't want to write down something that was used once on the internet. I want to make sure that this is something that I can really use in the future. Okay, and I can see in Oxford Dictionary, hammer out a compromise, so that looks pretty legitimate. This second search result is where I actually found the phrase, and then I can see the Collins English Dictionary doesn't have any example of hammer out a compromise. So I'm a little bit concerned about this. If it isn't obviously right, I'm not going to go and use it. But here I see it in this dictionary, and this is Oxford's Learner Dictionary. This is reliable, so I can add this to my vocabulary notebook. So now I can just add a compromise to my vocabulary notebook. One thing I noticed while researching this phrase is that it seems to be used mainly when discussing politicians and lawyers. So I'm going to edit my vocabulary notebook to reflect that. So I'm going to cross out they and replace it with the politicians or lawyers. Maybe in the future I'll see the phrase used in another context, but for now I'm going to be cautious and only use it with lawyers and politicians. The last thing I'm going to include is an example from my own life. If I use an example from my real life, it will help me remember because I will connect that memory I already have with this new phrase. So finally, I'm just going to add, for example, the County Council hammered out a solution to the shortage of hospital beds, because this was something that happened in my hometown when I was younger. So you might prefer to use pen and paper, or you might prefer to use a phone app or a Google Doc online, or whatever you're happier to use. Whatever you're most comfortable with is absolutely fine. I've also had students who use spreadsheets so that they can move the words around into various places according to how well they remember the vocabulary. I know this whole process takes time, but it will mean that you can use the word accurately, which is way better than saving time now and making mistakes in the IELTS test. Every day you should aim to include about 10 new words to your vocabulary notebook, and once you've done that, it's time to move on to the next step. And step 5 is the final step: review, review, review. For most people, this is the least enjoyable part of improving vocabulary, but it is absolutely the most important step. If we were able to remember vocabulary without reviewing, we wouldn't even need a vocabulary notebook in the first place. Without reviewing, you're not going to bring your Lexical Resource score from a band 6 to a 7 or a 7 to an 8. However, it's completely up to you how you do your review, and different people will learn in different ways. Now, you should try out different methods, but really settle on the one that works best for you and just use that over and over again. There is no single best way to review, and it's really up to what works best for you. What works for one person will not necessarily work for another. For some people, it's enough to just sit down and look through their vocabulary notebook. For other people, it's better to stand up and walk around and look at their notebook while they're on the move. There are some people who will remember better if they speak out loud while repeating the words. And lots of students need to just write out the words over and over again to help them remember. When I was studying languages, I always had cue cards in my wallet, so that if I was ever waiting for a bus or if I was in the queue at a shop, I could pull them out and use that time to review my vocabulary. Let me know the best way for you to review vocabulary in the comments below. I really hope that you take the advice in this lesson seriously. If you do, it's going to make a massive difference to your Task 2 score and all the other parts of the IELTS test as well. In my next lesson, I'll be looking at grammatical range and accuracy, so you can click subscribe to make sure you don't miss that.